Hey everybody, Fiore Cerecci here, Professor Fiore. I'm going to talk about Magister Ludi by Herman Hesse. So Magister Ludi is a book I've wanted to read for a long time. I have to actually start again. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience of a book you started or you thought about reading a long time ago, and then you felt, okay, maybe now's the time. And I waited, I guess, 50 years to read this book. So it was introduced to me when I was a teenager, and the guy that read it, I saw him read it. Friend of mine, the guy I really admired. I thought, if he likes it, must be good. So I started reading it, couldn't do it. Too hard for me. And it taught me a lesson in humility. Um, or maybe it's teaching me a lesson in humility now. Because it's hard to remember how I felt about it then. But I remember wanting to get back to it for a long time. And I mentioned a friend because Hermann Hesse, German author, winner of the Nobel Prize, very popular in the past. He wrote a couple things that became movies like Steppenwolf. Um, a lot of his books have to do with friendship and especially male friendship. So the idea of two people who are very different from each other. Sometimes one is more studious than the other. Like in my case, my friend was much more, uh, much better, kind of well read and everything. Um, I was a kid from Brooklyn, Italian American, and my friend was Jewish and from, ancestors from Eastern Europe. And I really just always admired his culture, his abilities and interest in music. And it was something very new for me. I grew up in a kind of working class neighborhood. All my relatives were, did the manual trades, carpenters, painters, contractors. They own restaurants. So, when I was 14, I met someone who presented a whole different world. And so it's interesting that the book is about, one of many books by Herman Hesse, which features friendships, very important theme. And it's a book I originally wanted to read because I was kind of admiring this friend of mine, maybe even idolizing. Now, we haven't seen each other in many years, and this is interesting because, one of the sad things about, moving on with your life is that sometimes you lose track of friends that, were so precious to you in the past. And at this point, it's not possible for me to be in touch with him again. But the book provides a kind of connection, a kind of a deep connection through, you know, what I imagine he saw in the book. So it's a kind of a deeper connection almost than if we were together and had a beer together or whatever. And so that's also a Herman Hesse theme, the theme of a kind of a meeting of the minds or of the souls. Uh, so his books deal with things like that. You may know Steppenwolf, which is kind of a fictionalized version of the early life of the Buddha, how the Buddha goes from a worldly life to a life of meditation and sainthood, really. Um, and this book is no exception to this list of many books. He wrote Demian. Another book that I love is Narcissus and Goldman. Again, about two friends. And this book is called The Glass Bead Game. And I know it as Magister Ludi, but you'll see that it's also called The Glass Bead Game, or it was in earlier translations. And it won the Nobel Prize in, I think, 1946. So very interesting. It's always interesting to think of years that something is published, right? Because you get 1 year after World War I, World War II, German writer, had lived much of his life in Switzerland. And so, this themes of war and pacifism and the hope of getting past war are in the book as well. The setting is almost like a science fiction setting. It's set in the future when there are no more wars. There's still East and West, so there's a clear identity of being from the West. It's about a fictional country. He never gives the name of the country, which is very interesting. Um, in the West. And it's the West because he often talks about China and the East in very admiring tones. And there's a province within this country called Castalia that does have a name. And Castalia is very special because Castalia is the place where people pursue a scholarly life, the life of the mind. Many of them play music, classical music, and what's special about them, two things that are special. First, not, what they consider the most special, right, is that they practice a kind of a life of study, celibacy, so they can't get married and they can't have romantic attachments. Um, and they practice this thing called the Glass Bead Game, which is a game, not really even a game. It's more like a competition to produce this configuration of ideas. So they use glass beads, or they used to use glass beads to represent, say, something very abstract, like, I don't know, the structure of Mozart's operas or Gothic cathedrals of the 13th century. They actually are able to do this with these glass beads. Um, the game has gone on for centuries, and at the time of the writing of this, when the story is set, they no longer use glass beads. The game has become so elegant and abstract that they have this transcription system by which they virtually place a glass bead or represent the way the glass bead would look. And so there's this elegant, sophisticated system of representing the achievements of the human mind, the human heart, the human imagination. And they often put them in contrast with each other. That's part of the game, like contrasting Mozart's operas with the, discovery of relativity by Albert Einstein, something like that. And the winner is the one who makes the connections most logically, most elegantly, most convincingly. So the name of the book is Glass Bead Game, but also within the game, there's a master of the game, a person who himself has been a great player or continues to be a great player, but organizes trainings, gets young people to do things in the run up to the big yearly game that happens in this province called Castalia in the city of Waldsell. So, so that's one part of the book, one big aspect of the book, and one reason that Castalia is an important place in this fictional tale. Um, and and the other thing that's valuable about Castalia is that it educates young men from all over the nation. Sometimes rich families send their kids to this place, and then they go back out into the world educated in ethics and mathematics and music, and hopefully they are more peaceful, loving people and things like that. But Kasai also produces teachers of its own order, because you have to belong to the orders, sorry, of Castalia. And they go out through the nation and become, teachers for kids, music teachers, things like that. So, what themes can we get out of it? What questions come out of the book that Hesse is trying to kind of get across? Because it's a book that, more than any other ones of his books, is teaching something, right? And so he's asking questions like, do we need a separate space by which people can pursue a life of quiet scholarship, a place where we preserve, we archive the accomplishments of human beings, and maybe provide writings and products, intellectual products that um, feed the peacefulness of this future country. And so, of course, the obvious thing that we can think of when we ask this question, obviously we would ask the same question today of universities. They are, especially certain universities, are kind of a world apart. We even have a word for that, right? The ivory tower. If you're being skeptical about the role of universities, ivory tower, I guess, connoting a kind of alienation and from the elitism and arrogance of the people of the ivory tower, or we just call it the academy, right? So there's a separate space in our society, supposedly separate space for universities and their mandate to produce new knowledge. If they're in the sciences, to produce new medicines and scientific advancements. If they're in the humanities, new scholarship and new insights and things like that. So the book gets a lot from this duality. In other words, it teaches us a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of having these two worlds like coexist. And the main character, Joseph Knecht, is becomes the Magister Ludi. He's a very attractive character. He starts out as a little kid. He doubts himself often. He wonders why he's doing things. He's a very honest person. He's a very ethical person. He makes friends easily. He is very easily trusted because he's such a good mentor and such a good fellow. And the name is so classic, Connect, I guess. I mean, I don't speak German, but I think it means knight, right? And so a man, a person, a noble person, supposedly noble person, right? Um, and so he's the center of the book, and he is the one who's, kind of defending Castalia when people attack it, or when people, and the people the one person who attacks it is this guy called um, um, Plinio de Signori, and his last name with an Italianate name, Signori, nobility, wealth, whatever. Um, but their debate is a very productive one. It's not just, a polarized debate like what we're used to today, but a really productive debate where each one makes his points, very good points, and we get to think about it, and they each influence each other. Eventually, Joseph Knecht leaves the order because it's not that he believes that the real world is better than Castalia. He still believes in Castalia when he leaves. Um, or that Plinio has persuaded him, but that he sees that the real world provides um, kind of a freer play for his sense of ethics and his sense of duty, right? So it's all about it's quite beautiful, but when you read it, you're kind of thinking like, say you have a position, say you believe, the Ivy Leagues, or if you're in England, Oxbridge. Um, are arrogant people. They think that they're better than everybody else. They look down on the working class or the uneducated, let's say. Um, so you have a position, you read the book, and you hear so many of their arguments, and you end up, you have Plinio who says, look at this. Like in the real world, I know regular working men um, who exhibit more ethics and connection to reality and than any of your fancy scholars, right? Uh, but then, and you think, yeah, okay, cool. That's a good point. Uh, and then, Joseph rebuts him and says, but where are you going to get a place where knowledge is respected, where culture could be enhanced, where kids could be educated? We want to train kids in at least knowing that there is something more to life than competitiveness and money grubbing and buying and selling properties and trying to make sure your kids get all your money and all those things that are they're not bad in themselves, but that's what makes the real world tough and can sometimes lead to forms of political tension, even violence. So, we need a place to educate kids in this kind of higher ethics. And the thing is that you read back and forth and you get a lot from that. But they change over time. Over time, Plinio becomes more and more unhappy with the real world, and Joseph Knecht becomes more and more unhappy with Castalia, and their changing positions also offer you more insights into the question, into this duality. At one point, Plinio gets cynical. He's been living in the real world now for 30 years. He goes back to see his old friend because they become friends. And he says, I used to think that Castalians were arrogant, but actually now I see that, working people um, could just as easily be bad people. They could just as easily, do things that are unethical. They cheat their neighbors. They vote for demagogues. We're in a time now when that's something that people worry about. So the book is really nuanced, and the dude, the author Herman Hesse, it's not like the book is fun to read. Not, I could see why it was hard for me when I was 14 or 15. It just goes on and on. It's very long, and there's long sections where they're just kind of pondering something. There is some suspense, why does he leave, and, things like that, the strong emotions. But there is no love. There is no romantic kind of interest. The women don't play a big role in the book. It's very male, or classically male oriented. Um, so, it's a tough book to read, but Hess takes his time, he takes his time. And in some ways, now being an older reader, I kind of appreciate it because, he's doing in the book one of the principles of the book. Like he's enacting in the writing of the book one of the principles in the book. So remember before I told you, that China and the East is seen in this future, fictional future, as a place where wisdom comes from, where yoga comes from, I guess India. And that reflects Hesse's kind of personal interest in the East. This is a thing of, I guess, more in the mid-century than now. Now that we're more globalized, it's not like we make the East into this like mysterious font of wisdom, although it is really, just as the West is, I believe. But but we can tell it's of that time, 40s, 50s, 60s. There were more writers back then and kind of asked us the question, shouldn't we be thinking about the East more, right? Shouldn't we be taking advantage and learning from the wisdom of the East, right? I think this is where yoga comes from and things like that. So so what is that Hess learns from the East and wants us to know? Well, one of the things he talks about many, many things like the Book of Changes, the I Ching, very interesting book, and philosophy. He talks about yin and yang. But one thing he talks about is the way that these scholars, these men of the order, right, it's called the order, refresh themselves when they get emotional, they get passionate, they get angry. They meditate. They learn to meditate, and they learn to balance themselves, take deep breaths, go back to nature, be refreshed. And it's a beautiful thing. But the book itself encourages you to slow down, right? The book doesn't give you a quick fix, doesn't give you a violent act to feel angry about. Like think about what pushes plots, right? Even plots of very, very good books, right? You take a great writer, like Toni Morrison, like you know, the woman writer who wrote "I Know Why the Crawdads Sing," a beautiful book. They're often animated by a sense of outrage, which is a real thing and not a bad thing, right? Obviously. Um, but it's still a very classic motivator. It's like you read on thinking, is justice, are we going to get justice in this world, right? What is this crime going to stand, right? And he doesn't have the advantage of that in this book. He doesn't offer that. And so what it does is it slows you down. And you have the very tough choice. Either you just stop reading at some point, you're like, okay, where is this going? I'm just listening to this musing for a long time, which is better, the real world or the monastic world, the Ivy League or you continue and you get into the flow. And the flow is a very meditative flow. The paragraphs are fitti fitti, an Italian word, which means thick and dense, right? There's very few breaks. And so if you read it and you're into that kind of thing, then you can actually get lulled into this beautiful sense of peacefulness, right? So there's a couple things. One is the duality that's built up from which we learn a lot. The other is the pace of the book, the slowness of the book, which is in itself maybe a good thing. But there are other things too that are interesting. So I made a list here. Another one, there are different little moments in the book that I personally learned a lot from. I want to share them with you. One is genius or genius loci, right? Um, a Latin term, which I've always been fascinated with. Genius loci or genius loci um, is a term. I think it comes from Vitruvius, but it's a term from Roman philosophy or Roman architecture, which means that a genius is basically a spirit, and the genius loci is the spirit of a place. That's what it literally means. So, have you ever been in a situation where you go somewhere and you feel that there's a positive energy there, or there's a negative energy, right? The Romans believed that certain spots in the world had a spiritual energy. Maybe they were blessed by the gods or something like that. And so they used to build their monuments on exactly that spot with that belief. And often those spots were places where previous civilizations had built something. This is why you'll have a Roman monument on top of a, let's say, a Greek monument, and the Greek monument itself, because the Greeks probably believe something similar, on top of some other, let's say, uh, a Hittite, right? Like the city of Troy, for example, on a Hittite city, right? And so how does this figure into the book? Well, part of the beauty, if you're a person who loves academia, or loves the idea of academia, or loves what academia should be, right? A place where you can peacefully, quietly find yourself, find your core, find what's intellectually important to you, what's spiritually important to you. If you're an artist or musician, to deepen your art without the worries and cares of like everyday, survival, then the place where this happens is important as well. So I went to school in Brooklyn College. It's part of New York City, and Brooklyn is famous, and usually stereotypes are a little bit negative or kind of condescending, the place of, Italian Americans who talk like, John Travolta, or something like that, or, some kind of working class, tough streets kind of vibe, which it was. Um, but Brooklyn College, if you go to Brooklyn College, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It has a little bell tower, and it was mostly where kids from Brooklyn and Queens, and it's a school for the people of New York. It's part of the City University of New York. Not expensive, but it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. And it's got a little quad, it kind of looks like a mini Harvard, I guess. And I've been to Harvard, and beautiful as well. You just kind of feel there's something great right there, something happening. Um, some places in New York where they say, there were these Native American sites, for example, 42nd Street. I don't know if you've been to New York, but near Times Square, Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street, we have these famous lions there, the Central New York Public Library. And you just I was reading that it was a site for Native Americans. It was a lake there, where animals would gather, there's water. And I don't know if it's my imagination. Whenever I pass that spot, I just kind of close my eyes and think, this place feels great. Sometimes I'll stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and just be like, just while the cars are, kind of stop for a second, I'll just stand there and say, what was underneath my feet, 1,000 years ago. So the in the book, Herman Hesse takes his time. Remember, I told you he takes his time, right? And he describes Waldsee as a place that inspires a sense of peacefulness. Have you ever been to a place like that? Maybe even a hotel, maybe even a beach somewhere, maybe some mountain hike that you did, where you just reach the place you're like, oh, I want to just be here forever. I want to remember this forever, right? And I just love that somebody takes the time to just show you that in a book. And the book is not completely taken up with, righting a wrong, or finally marrying the person you want, or, you know, um, succeeding even though you were abused as a child. Like all these things are super valuable. There's amazing books written in those genres. I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing is one of all-time favorites, and things like that. Toni Morrison, as I talked about, the history of generational trauma, very, very essential American reading. But here's something positive that, I hope everyone can feel this is a spot, this is a sacred spot. And so there's genius loci. Then there's a lot about teaching, because Joseph Knecht, as well as the people of Castalia, when they're doing their job correctly, because a lot of times they're very disconnected, but when they're doing their jobs correctly and they think about their duty to the rest of the world, they're teachers. And there's a part that I love. I'm a teacher, and there's a part I love because it's something that I guess a lot of teachers struggle with. I know I struggled with it, and I continue to struggle with it. Um, and it's, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing as teachers? So Hess is describing Joseph's success with younger students. He likes teaching younger students. Most magisters teach advanced students in the game, but he loves teaching young kids, especially kids who are not part of the order. And he says, well, what is teaching? What does he discover is good teaching? I'm just gonna read it out here from my notes, because I just found it, a good lesson for me. And he said, teaching is to transplant your hard-earned knowledge into other minds. And this is not the end of the sentence. And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. I want to share what I've learned. Sometimes you hard earned, like you took you a lot of pain and sacrifice to learn those things. You guys may know if you're teachers or if you're trying to train someone at your job, how hard it was to learn certain lessons and how great it is to be able to share those. But then he finishes with the part that kind of really makes me think, aha, he knows the struggles of a teacher. And he says, and see how it takes completely different forms in those minds. Right? So you transplant your ideas into other minds, but then you see how it takes completely different forms. And I just always struggle, and maybe a lot of us struggle with the idea like, are we prepared to see that what we have expressed to other people may not take the form we want it to? Are we humble enough to say, look, I taught this political science class and I wanted them to take away this lesson from it, this way that this certain people were treated unfairly, let's say, or the way that war could have been averted in that situation. Like, isn't that the lesson of this text? And then students don't take that. They take the information and they do with it what they want. And it's hard to take that as a teacher. You want your lesson to be learned, right? But students, for various reasons, will not take it. It will take different forms, the information you've given them, right? And so that's a hard lesson, and it's a good lesson because Joseph Knecht likes watching the ideas transform as they're communicated to other people. So I thought that was good. It was a good lesson for me, and I think it's a good definition of teaching. It's an inspiring definition of teaching that, if you really watch, and I didn't want to make it too political. Let's take it out of the realm of the political because that might raise some kind of unpleasant uh, disagreements. But say take it into the realm of literature and say or music, and you say, look, this is the way Mozart organize this symphony, or you're teaching music, either you're teaching the history music or I'm a musician as well. So you teach the history music or you directly teach how to play the flute. And you say, hold it like this and emphasize this part. And the students like, no, and you see them, yeah, sometimes they do it because they just don't want to learn, and that's okay too. People are ready sometimes and not ready other times. But they really have kind of thought about what you said and they just don't agree. And life is much easier if you respect that. And not only is it easier, it makes you a better teacher, I think, if you take that one step further and you say, well, how can I organize a lesson so that the thing I'm teaching truly becomes theirs? Like they can more easily take it and apply it. And they feel welcomed into that process of sharing ideas and then bringing them one step further than you went or you're able to go. So that's another aspect of the book. But you do get tired after a while, just just to kind of take a break from that kind of praise of Herman Hesse, of his earnest tone. Like he's very ethical, almost tiresomely ethical. The characters are just, Joseph Knecht leaves because he feels he cannot no longer, truly be a great magister and truly do his job from the bottom of his heart. So after a while it becomes almost like a Superman movie, or the early Superman movie. Like, can anybody really be that good? That self-sacrificing, and so it's not like I want to criticize the book. I feel the easiest thing in the world is to be dismissive of a book. I think it's much more valuable to kind of ask always a further question. Why would he do that? Why is he so earnest? I'm a, I studied English literature and and in English literature, we're kind of used to writers who are like much more cynical, right? There's this kind of a a cynical view of the world. They didn't take themselves as seriously, at least a lot of English writers, not everybody, but um French writers even less, like Balzac, someone like that. But you got to think, right? 1946, people are grasping for how to avoid such a horrible slaughter and waste and generational trauma as this has been, World War II. Um, the ongoing blight of colonialism, of racism around the world, of things like that. People just picking up the pieces. I know from my history, our town, I came from Italy when I was a very young boy. Our town completely destroyed by American bombs and people suffering for decades from the trauma of that war, the many, many things that happened, not just for us, I'm just all around the world. Chinese, Japanese, I mean, everybody suffered. Um, so you can imagine a writer of that time thinking, what is it about our institutions that can be improved? And so the earnestness, the ethical nature of it, the questioning, the hard questioning of the academy. When is it valuable? When does it become arrogant? When is it useful? All of these things, and even the valuing of the East, which now would be seen maybe as an othering or kind of a condescending Western thing. Oh, look at the Indians. They gave us yoga, kind of like reducing, the great civilizations of the East. But not to forgive somebody, right? Necessarily, right? We take opinions as we want of literature of the past, but more to say, how does this come to be? How does a book like this come to be? And I think it comes to be because there's a grasping of that time for some kind of solution to the problem of war. And he has a lot of different solutions, not just yoga and meditation. There's things like, the game itself. Let's think about the game for a second. I'm about to stop in about a few minutes. So the game itself is called the Glass Bead Game, and it represents the great accomplishments of the human mind, the human heart, the human spirit, human imagination. I kind of wish there would be more women included. For a long time I studied women's literature, and dude, let's have some balance here. But think about what the game is, right? The game is a way to represent. In other words, it's a language, a non-linguistic language that represents the positive possibilities in the human mind to produce incredible things, great architecture, medicines, a knowledge of the universe, music and the healing powers of music, meditation itself, philosophy, Taoist appreciation for nature, right? There's a Taoist element as well. And so it's an attempt to have a universal language, a language of peace, really, to mutual appreciation of what we're capable of when we're not taken up with property and money and ambition and national pride and things like that. So that's there too. So for better or for worse, those are the points that I found in the book. I expected my talk to be a little more pro Herman Hesse, but as I'm talking to you guys, I'm seeing that I'm kind of critiquing it as I go. But I do love the book, just to be very honest. It's been a great experience, a great way for me to connect back with my friend from high school, and God bless him wherever he is. A really beautiful way to connect. Um, and so the book, I recommend the book. Um, and there's a lot of YouTube uh, videos up there that, besides mine, of course, that are great takes on the book, shorter than mine. Um, so I recommend at least dipping into it. And I think on Spotify there's actually a little drama that they've created, or a little radio drama, which gives you a great outline of the book. Um, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this talk and got something from it that's valuable for you. And I hope to see you again when I talk about the next book, or maybe take a look back at some of my earlier videos. I don't know how I feel about them, but I do like talking about Francis Bacon. That's a big topic in my videos. Um, Very inspiring to talk about how people came upon the idea of science in the modern Western world, like what's involved in that. Surprising things that you don't take normally. You don't get normally in kind of popular versions of the birth of science and the early scientists and things like that. Okay, guys, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.